and we have Ryan Monso from GoCoogs coming up next. Talk a little Houston, the only newcomer here for Texas schools, which is actually kind of interesting.
Yeah, man, it's weird that they're here. I mean, I'm looking
really
around
is.
and you see
I saw Joseph
BYU,
Duarte and I was like, oh right,
Cincinnati,
they're here now.
Houston,
It's cool.
UCF. I mean, it's just a different vibe around.
And I feel
the
like
Big 12.
Houston, out of all the teams, the Texas teams, the Big 12 is the biggest margin for what can happen
Right.
Oh, 100%.
in their football season. Like we were talking earlier, it's like that first game against UTSA is really going to show like how this season is going to go. You lose that game, and it's like, okay, this could go off the rails real quick. You win, and then but they got the talent. It's just young guys that they can make a run.
Yeah,
possibly.
you open up week 1 and it's stressful, but we got a guy here that's going to talk all about it. He looks a little nervous when we mention the
UTSA.
How are you feeling about that?
I don't know.
Ryan Monso, of course, from GoCoogs.com here. Another member of the Republic Football Network, Dave Campbell's Texas Football. Ryan, we were talking a little bit. We were at dinner last night, and we were talking a little bit about just like expectations and in general. Just like, I mean, I don't know. It seems like a lot. Until recently, they've had some good recruiting wins the past couple weeks, but it seemed during the spring it was a lot of like doom and gloom. You know, you had the spring game get kind of canceled. It was like a lot of different bad snowballing things, and so it's kind of been a nice revelation to have like the recruiting wins recently because it seemed like a lot of just like pessimism for a while at the program.
Yeah, there's been a lot of pessimism. But things have been rolling pretty well since mid-June. They started ramping up to the Big 12, when they went in on July 1st. They paired it with some announcements on capital campaign, and then they paired it with announcements on recruiting. And so things are moving in the right direction, it seems. But this part doesn't matter.
Sure.
And it doesn't matter until that first weekend in September. And my fear is that UTSA has spent a year talking Houston Cougar football.
Sure.
And U of H has spent a year talking Big 12. And what happens when pad meet pad and, one school still smarting over a 3 overtime loss a year ago that really, it didn't ruin their season, obviously, but could have been a big part of what they did. And U of H coming off a, frankly, mediocre season, bad season,
right?
Losing to the private schools and nearly losing to another with Rice. You've got a lot to prove.
Sure.
And the players talk and say they have a chip on their shoulder. That's great. Let's see how that actually plays out.
Yeah, no, 100%. I will say this. So for so many years, I remember when the first realignment was happening, Colorado leaving the Big 12, all that stuff. It seemed like Houston going to the Big 12 was the bridge too far for a lot of programs in the Big 12, where it was like, no. They don't want the Houston market getting in, or they don't want a team in the Houston market clogging up their Houston market. The Baylor, Tech, all that, they wanted to keep it to themselves. So we're fast forward, obviously. Houston gets the invite. Did you think this was a move that was like going to happen, or was it just a matter of time at that point, or were you just saying, no, they're never going to let us in?
When OU and Texas made their move, you knew that was your one shot.
Sure.
And I think everybody kind of got caught off guard, but they rallied. Before that, no, I didn't think it was ever going to happen. I thought maybe the American wasn't the end of the road, but it wasn't going to include a Big 12 invite.
Sure.
That rug had been pulled out too many times, and at some point, you just got to face the music.
Yeah.
Now, when they did get the opportunity, when the Big 12 was suffering and it looked like things were about to fall apart, and ESPN started working with the AAC to start pulling members, and U of H was a big part of that. And you thought, okay, because it really didn't look like the Big 12 would survive.
Sure.
And so at that point, you didn't even really want to be in the Big 12.
Right.
But when it did solidify and when they did get a plan, U of H was a part. It looked like for a minute they might not be, and there was some last-minute wrangling, but they got in. And U of H people have been focused on this for 30 years. And it's going to be a big deal when TCU comes in week 3. It's going to be a really big deal.
Yeah.
And those players don't know that. They don't understand it. They've heard it. They've heard it a lot.
Sure.
But they don't understand.
Yeah.
But they'll feel the energy in the stadium, and I think it'll connect.
I was about to say, season tickets have sold out, right? I believe
They're close. They're
close.
over
That's
25,000.
Yeah.
That's a good sign, definitely.
I was about to say, it's been when I was kind of at my peak Houston pessimism, I saw that number drop, and it was like they've had one of their highest surges in season tickets. I was like, okay, there is some hype here. Because, right, I didn't want – my worry was that, you know, a lot of the smoke about Dana and, like, all that. Like, he threw out the quote about my buyout and all that stuff. I was like, oh, is this fan base just going to be beaten down? But it's like, no, you mentioned it, right? 30 years of, like, wanting to be in the show, basically, right? The Power 5 conference. Back in the, you know, a couple head coaches ago, Tom Herman leading, you know, being in this stadium, right? And, like, going to
beating
year 6.
OU.
Yeah, I was trying to remember the win. It was OU. Beating OU and, like, being on the stage where you're saying Houston is on the verge of being up there. And now it's here, right?
Yep.
And I guess for me, you know, we can talk a little bit about the Dana thing, where it's like he's a head coach who you brought in to get you to this point, right? And is he the coach? Is this the year where he kind of proves if he's the coach to kind of take it forward now?
Yeah, I don't know if that's anybody's thought, to be honest. I don't think anybody is wondering is it going to be proven this year. I think this is get your feet wet, see what it's about, and really get like a firsthand example of where you are in recruiting.
Yeah.
Like how far you are behind.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if Bear Bryant coaches a team. If you're just so far behind recruiting, it doesn't matter. And so I think Dana is going to have more leash than a lot of fans would like because you've got to get to that point. You can't reset in the Big 12 and then reset again with a coach unless it just falls out.
Sure.
I mean, if you fall out, then anything's on the table. But 4 wins, 5 wins, I think you could build on that.
Sure.
For me, year 2 is the most important. You don't have Texas at home. You don't have the big TCU premium game at home. What did season tickets look like that year?
Yeah.
And what does fan interest look like that year? And that's how you're going to figure out where this is going. For 30 years, for 20 years in the Dome, in the Southwest Conference, you had big crowds for A&M, big crowds for Texas, and then flatline for everybody else. Is it going to happen again?
Sure.
And you're going to find out in year 2 when you get Tech and Baylor most likely at home, and then no Texas, obviously,
right,
and then travel to TCU. And I wish I had an answer for you, but I don't.
Sure.
We'll see.
Yeah. Carter, you mentioned variance, and I kind of want to get Ryan's thoughts on that because we were talking to you and Brad last night at dinner, and I think Brad threw out 7, right? 7 wins or something like around there. What would you constitute a good season where you're like, you know, you didn't necessarily overachieve, obviously didn't disappoint, but what would you say is like Houston you can come out in December saying, brush your hands off, say, not bad.
Yeah.
You can say any of 4 numbers here, and I'll be like, okay.
Yeah. Well, Brad has this point that you have basically half an AAC schedule, right? You have your 3 out-of-conference teams. You play Central Florida. You play Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And then you play West Virginia, who's going to be pretty bad. So if you have 6 very winnable games, is anything less than 6 wins a success? There are fans that think just beating Texas is enough. I am not one of those people.
Right. I believe Brad mentioned that. He's like, they can go 1-11 as ones against Texas. They're like awesome.
Pesman has been saying that.
Sure.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I think it's just being funny. I don't think there are some fans that is so important to. I'm not one of them.
Sure.
I think you have to show progress. Dana's basically had the same quarterback the entire time he's been there.
100%.
He had 4 games with Derek King, and then he left, and then it's been Clayton Tune. And Clayton has started every game but one. Logan Holgerson started at UConn.
I forgot about that.
In 2019.
Yeah. Was that the red shirt? Everybody redshirted year, basically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my expectation or what I think a success would be is 8 wins.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't know how you get there
Sure.
Unless you play at a level. You've got at least right now 37 new people on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
How do you bring them in and make a team out of that?
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. And you've got a new quarterback. You've got a running back group that is unproven. They did an okay job last year, but terrible in short yardage.
Yeah.
And so you've got to they've got to show me.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's fair.
there's a lot that can happen. And like you said, 4 numbers. It could be 3 wins. It could be 5, 6, 7.
Yeah.
I think 8 is a success. And that's including a bowl game.
So if the wins are more kind of, it's almost a toss-up. It's more about, like you're saying, showing progress on the field. What are the position groups or position group that you need to see the most progress from last year to this year?
Offensive line.
Okay.
You've got starters coming back at left tackle and center. You've got some other guys switching around, and you have a guy coming back at right tackle or right guard, I believe. So you've got some spots, but this team showed 2 years ago against Texas Tech, they got manhandled in the second half.
Yeah.
And Clayton Tune threw, I think, 4 interceptions, had 4 sacks. That can't happen, especially with new quarterbacks, and you lose your best wide receiver, your best offensive player. So offensive line really has to show something. And I think you're going to see it between week 1 and week 3.
Mm-hmm.
If you see progress then, okay. I don't know what week 1's going to look like. I really don't.
Right.
On the defensive side, I think it's a defensive backfield. I think it's at safety. You had a lot of problems back there. Defensive line has been very good for a few years, but you are missing a lot of those guys. A lot have been drafted. A lot are playing pro football. That's probably the best coach on the team, Brian Early.
Sure.
But we've got to see what that defensive backfield can do, because they are going to be on an island a lot more than they were in the AAC. And can they make that happen? Can they shut it down?
Yeah.
And Dana's going to try to do something in the Big 12 that teams really don't do. He's going to try to control the ball. He's basically going to take a knee. And he's been doing that since he got to Houston, and it's frustrating to watch. And we'll see. I don't know if you can survive in this conference with the way they've played in the AAC or the game plan that they've had.
Sure. I get that. All righty, Ryan. Appreciate you, man. Dana's going to talk here today. So, like I said, all Texas teams are today except for Tech, who's tomorrow on Thursday. So we're going to let you go ahead and get out of here, buddy. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, Ryan. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, Mallory.
Ryan, and of course, listen to him and Brad on GoCoogs, talking about them Cougars on the Republican Football Podcast Network. Also, subscribe. They have their own page and all that stuff. So feel free to give them all the support you can. If you're a Houston fan, if you're not a Houston fan, just want to keep up with Houston, definitely give those guys a follow and listen to talking about them Cougars.